This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Psuke Berea. The Concept of Nature by Alfred North Whitehead. Section 9. The Ultimate Physical Concepts. The second chapter of this book lays down the first principle to be guarded in framing our physical concept. We must avoid vicious bifurcation. Nature is nothing else than the deliverance of sense awareness. We have no principles whatever to tell us what could stimulate mind towards sense awareness. Our sole task is to exhibit in one system the characters and interrelations of all that is observed. Our attitude towards nature is purely behavioristic so far as concerns the formulation of physical concepts. Our knowledge of nature is an experience of activity or passage. The things previously observed are active entities, the events. They are chunks in the life of nature. These events have to each other relations which in our knowledge differentiate themselves into space relations and time relations. But this differentiation between space and time, though inherent in nature, is comparatively superficial, and space and time are each partial expressions of one fundamental relation between events which is neither spatial nor temporal. This relation I call extension. The relation of extending over is the relation of including, either in a spatial or in a temporal sense, or in both. But the mere inclusion is more fundamental than either alternative and does not require any spatio-temporal differentiation. In respect to extension, two events are mutually related so that either 1. One includes the other, or 2. One overlaps the other without complete inclusion, or 3. They are entirely separate. But great care is required in the definition of spatial and temporal elements from this basis in order to avoid tacit limitations, really depending on undefined relations and properties. Such fallacies can be avoided by taking account of two elements in our experience, namely 1. Our observational present, and 2. Our percipient event. Our observational present is what I call a duration. It is the whole of nature apprehended in our immediate observation. It has, therefore, the nature of an event, but possesses a peculiar completeness which marks out such durations as a special type of events inherent in nature. A duration is not instantaneous. It is all that there is of nature with certain temporal limitations. In contradistinction to other events, a duration will be called infinite, and other events are finite. In our knowledge of a duration we distinguish 1. Certain included events which are particularly discriminated as to their peculiar individualities, and 2. The remaining included events, which are only known as necessarily in being, by reason of the relations to the discriminated events and to the whole duration. The duration as a whole is signified by that quality of relatedness in respect to extension, possessed by the part which is immediately under observation, namely, by the fact that there is essentially a beyond to whatever is observed. I mean by this that every event is known as being related to other events which it does not include. This fact, that every event is known as possessing the quality of exclusion, shows that exclusion is as positive a relation as inclusion. There are, of course, no merely negative relations in nature, and exclusion is not the mere negative of inclusion, though the two relations are contraries. Both relations are concerned solely with events, and exclusion is capable of logical definition in terms of inclusion. Perhaps the most obvious exhibition of significance is to be found in our knowledge of the geometrical character of events inside an opaque material object. For example, we know that an opaque sphere has a center. This knowledge has nothing to do with the material. The sphere may be a solid, uniform billiard ball or a hollow lawn tennis ball. Such knowledge is essentially the product of significance, since the general character of the external discriminated events has informed us that there are events within the sphere, and also informed us of their geometrical structure. Some criticisms on the principles of natural knowledge show that difficulty has been found in apprehending durations as real stratifications of nature. I think that this hesitation arises from the unconscious influence of the vicious principles of bifurcation so deeply embedded in modern philosophical thought. We observe nature as extended in an immediate present which is simultaneous but not instantaneous, and therefore the whole which is immediately discerned or signified as an interrelated system forms a stratification of nature which is a physical fact. This conclusion immediately follows unless we admit bifurcation in the form of the principle of psychic additions, here rejected. Our percipient event is that event included in our observational present, which we distinguish as being in some peculiar way our standpoint for perception. It is, roughly speaking, that event which is our bodily life within the present duration. The theory of perception, as evolved by medical psychology, is based on significance. The distant situation of a perceived object is merely known to us as signified by our bodily state, i.e., by our percipient event. In fact, perception requires sense awareness of the significations of our percipient event, together with sense awareness of peculiar situation between certain objects and the events thus signified. Our percipient event is saved by being the whole of nature by this fact of its significations. This is the meaning of calling the percipient event our standpoint for perception. The course of a ray of light is only derivatively connected with perception. What we do perceive are objects as related to events, signified by the bodily states excited by the ray. These signified events, as is in the case of images seen behind a mirror, may have very little to do with the actual course of the ray. In the course of evolution, those animals have survived whose sense awareness is concentrated on those significations of their bodily states which are on the average important for their welfare. The whole world of events is signified, but there are some which exact the death penalty for inattention. The percipient event is always here and now in the associated present duration. It has, what may be called, an absolute position in that duration. Thus, one definite duration is associated with a definite percipient event, and we are thus aware of a peculiar relation which finite events can bear to durations. I call this relation cogredience. The notion of rest is derivative from that of cogredience, and the notion of motion is derivative from that of inclusion within a duration without cogredience in it. In fact, motion is a relation of varying character between an observed event and an observed duration, and cogredience is the most simple character or subspecies of motion. To sum up, a duration and a percipient event are essentially involved in the general character of each observation of nature, and the percipient event is a cogredient with the duration. Our knowledge of the peculiar characters of different events depends upon our power of comparison. I call the exercise of this factor in our knowledge recognition, and the requisite sense awareness of the comparable characters I call sense recognition. Recognition and abstraction essentially involve each other. Each of them exhibits an entity for knowledge which is less than the concrete fact, but